A quiet engineering student was thrown off Northern State University's championship shooting team for questioning decades-old training methods, for suggesting that data and modern sports science could improve their performance, for being the only woman who dared to challenge their traditional approach. They called her an overthinker, a distraction, someone who belonged in the classroom rather than on the firing line with the defending conference champions. And then the NCAA National Championships arrived in Denver. While the team that had dismissed her struggled to adapt to the altitude and mountain winds, she stood alone on the podium at the National Sports Center, holding the individual gold medal they said she'd never earn. The same coaches who had kicked her out were now asking how she'd mastered conditions that had defeated their entire squad. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The pre-dawn air at Rocky Mountain Gun Club carried the sharp bite of Colorado autumn, thin and crystalline in a way that made every sound travel farther than it should. Emma Rodriguez moved through the parking lot with the measured pace of someone who had learned to find rhythm in solitude, her equipment case rolling quietly behind her on wheels that had seen better days. The gravel crunched softly under her boots as she made her way toward the outdoor ranges, where the silhouettes of target frames stood like sentinels against the backdrop of the Rockies. She had been making this drive for 2 months now, 43 minutes each way from her apartment near campus to this civilian club tucked into the foothills west of Fort Collins. The membership fee had taken a significant chunk of her part-time job savings, but it was worth every dollar for what the university range could no longer provide peace. No teammates making jokes about her notebooks full of ballistics calculations. No coach rolling his eyes when she mentioned wind drift coefficients. No politics or personalities to navigate. Just her rifle and the endless pursuit of precision. That had defined her life since she was 12 years old. Emma unlocked the range shed and began her routine with the methodical precision her grandfather Carlos had drilled into her during those summer mornings in the New Mexico desert. Every piece of equipment had its place. Every step had its purpose. She assembled her shooting mat first, the worn canvas spread perfectly square to the firing line. Her rifle case opened with a soft click, revealing the custom precision rifle she had built herself over 2 years, piece by carefully selected piece. The stock was adjustable, the barrel free-floated, the trigger group tuned to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure. It wasn't the fanciest rifle on any firing line, but it was hers in every sense that mattered. The morning ritual continued as Emma checked her equipment with the thoroughness of an aircraft mechanic. She ran a bore snake through the barrel, examined each piece of brass for signs of wear, verified that her scope's zero hadn't shifted during transport. Her engineering background made her meticulous about details that other shooters often overlooked. The small variables that could mean the difference between a perfect shot and a missed opportunity. She had learned early that precision shooting was as much about consistency and preparation as it was about trigger control. As the first rays of sunlight began to paint the peaks behind her, Emma opened her most treasured possession, a leather-bound notebook that had belonged to her grandfather during his military service. The pages were filled with decades of shooting, data, range conditions, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Carlos had served as a designated marksman in Vietnam, and his notes reflected an understanding of ballistics that went far beyond what most civilian shooters ever encountered. Emma had added her own entries over the years, creating a database of performance under every conceivable condition. The wind was picking up as it always did when the sun hit the mountain slopes, creating the kind of variable conditions that separated good shooters from great ones. Emma pulled out her wind meter and took readings at 3 different heights, noting how the air currents changed as they moved across the uneven terrain. This was the kind of detail that had gotten her into trouble with Coach Thompson back at the university. While her teammates relied on flags and instinct, Emma approached wind reading like the engineering problem it was, calculating drift values and adjusting her point of aim accordingly. She settled into her shooting position with the fluid grace of someone who had spent thousands of hours perfecting her technique. Her left elbow found its natural pocket in the mat. Her right hand settled onto the grip with consistent pressure. Her cheek pressed against the stock with the same contact every time. The ritual was almost meditative, each movement flowing into the next until she became part of the rifle rather than simply holding it. Through her scope, the target at 100 yards appeared crystal clear, the black bullseye centered in the crosshairs. Emma's first shot of the morning was her tribute to Carlos, the one she fired not for score but for remembrance. The rifle spoke with authority, the recoil pushing straight back into her shoulder as the bullet traced its arc through the thin mountain air. Through her scope, she watched the impact appear just left of center, exactly where she had aimed to compensate for the gentle crosswind. The shot was good, clean, honest. It was the kind of shot that came from understanding rather than luck. The sound of the gunshot echoed off the canyon walls and faded into the vastness of the Colorado landscape. Emma worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round. She fired 9 more shots in steady rhythm, each one placed with deliberate intent based on her reading of the conditions. When she was finished, she walked downrange to examine her target with the critical eye of someone who demanded perfection. From herself, the group measured just under 3/4 of an inch, clustered around the center of the bullseye with the consistency that marked a truly skilled shooter. Emma made notes in her grandfather's notebook, recording wind speed, temperature, humidity, and her sight adjustments. The data would join thousands of other entries, creating a reference library that no coach or teammate had ever bothered to examine. They saw her notebooks as evidence of overthinking, but Emma knew they were something far more valuable proof that excellence could be measured, analyzed, and replicated. As she packed her equipment, Emma allowed herself a moment to look back toward Fort Collins, where her former teammates were probably just waking up in their comfortable dorm rooms. They would eat breakfast in the dining hall, attend classes, and show up to practice with equipment provided by the university and techniques unchanged since Coach Thompson's playing days. They had talent, certainly, but they also had something. Emma increasingly realized she was better off without the luxury of not having to prove themselves every single day. The drive back to campus took her past the university shooting complex, a modern facility with climate-controlled indoor ranges and electronic scoring systems. Emma had spent 3 years of her life in those lanes, working her way up from walk-on to varsity team member through sheer determination and countless hours of practice. She had earned her spot on the team not through natural athleticism, but through the kind of stubborn persistence that her engineering professors recognized and respected. While other shooters relied on feel and instinct, Emma had approached the sport like a technical discipline, studying ballistics texts and experimenting with equipment modifications that most college shooters never considered. Her relationship with the team had started promisingly enough. Coach Thompson had appreciated her work ethic, even if he didn't understand her methods. Her teammates had welcomed her as the quiet girl who always volunteered for equipment maintenance and never complained about early morning practice sessions. For a while, Emma had thought she had found her place, a community where her dedication to precision would be valued and her analytical approach would be seen as an asset rather than a quirk. The problems had started during her junior year when Emma began to notice patterns in the team's performance that troubled her. They shot exceptionally well in practice but consistently underperformed in competition, particularly when conditions differed from their controlled indoor environment. Emma spent weeks analyzing their scores, comparing practice results to match performance, identifying variables that seemed to correlate with their struggles. What she found was a team that had become too comfortable with consistency, unprepared for the kind of variability they would face in serious competition. Emma had approached the issue the way she approached everything, methodically and with supporting data. She prepared a presentation complete with performance charts and recommendations based on sports science research from Olympic-level programs. Her suggestions weren't radical, modified practice routines that simulated match pressure, training in variable weather conditions, mental preparation techniques that had been proven effective at the highest levels of competition. She had expected discussion, perhaps some resistance to change, but ultimately the kind of reasoned consideration her engineering professors gave to well-researched proposals. Instead, she had encountered something she hadn't expected from people. She considered friends and mentors dismissal based not on the merits of her ideas but on who she was. Coach Thompson had listened to her presentation with the patience of someone humoring a child, nodding at appropriate intervals but never engaging with the substance of her research. When she finished, his response had been swift and definitive. The team would continue with the methods that had brought them 3 consecutive conference championships. Emma's mistake had been pressing the issue. She had believed that better data would lead to better decisions, that logic and evidence would ultimately prevail over tradition and habit. She had continued to track the team's performance, documenting the correlation between their practice environment and their competitive struggles. She had suggested small modifications to their routine, minor adjustments that could help them adapt to different conditions without abandoning their fundamental approach. Tyler Matthews, the team captain and Coach Thompson's obvious favorite, had been the first to openly oppose her suggestions. Tyler possessed the kind of natural shooting ability that made difficult shots look effortless, the kind of instinctive talent that college coaches love to showcase. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He shot beautiful groups in practice and had won several individual medals at regional competitions. What he lacked was the ability to maintain that performance when conditions changed, when wind or altitude or pressure disrupted his comfortable routine. Tyler's opposition to Emma's ideas had less to do with their technical merit than with their source. He had earned his position through 4 years of dedication to Coach Thompson's program, and he saw Emma's suggestions as implicit criticism of everything he had worked to achieve. Her data-driven approach challenged the intuitive style that had brought him success, and her willingness to question established methods threatened the hierarchy that placed him at the top of the team's social structure. Jessica Park, the team's other senior member, had initially been more receptive to Emma's ideas. Jessica was a technically sound shooter who understood the value of preparation and analysis. She had even experimented with some of Emma's suggested modifications during individual practice sessions. But when the conversation moved from technical discussion to team politics, Jessica had chosen loyalty to her teammates over support for innovation. She had remained silent when Tyler began to characterize Emma's suggestions as disruptive, offering neither support nor opposition when the debate became personal rather than technical. The breaking point had come during a team meeting in late September, when Coach Thompson announced the roster for the upcoming regional championships. Emma had been shooting consistently well in practice, her scores rivaling or exceeding those of her teammates. Her technique had evolved through careful study and relentless practice, incorporating elements from her grandfather's military precision shooting background with modern sports science principles. She had every reason to expect inclusion in the traveling squad. Instead, Coach Thompson had named Tyler and Jessica as the team's representatives, along with 2 underclassmen whose potential he wanted to showcase in regional competition. Emma's name had not been mentioned. When she asked about the selection criteria, Coach Thompson's explanation had been brief and unsatisfying. The team needed shooters who could perform under pressure without overthinking their technique. Emma had requested a private meeting to discuss the decision, approaching Coach Thompson with the same professional demeanor she used with her engineering professors. She had prepared carefully, bringing performance data that demonstrated her consistency and competitive readiness. She had highlighted her strong showing in recent practice sessions and her experience in high-pressure situations during previous competitions. She had made her case calmly and factually, without emotion or complaint. Coach Thompson's response had revealed the true nature of their conflict. The issue wasn't Emma's shooting ability or her competitive record. The problem was her approach to the sport, her insistence on analyzing and questioning methods that had worked for decades. He explained that shooting was fundamentally about instinct and feel, about the kind of natural ability that couldn't be reduced to spreadsheets and calculations. Emma's analytical approach, he suggested, was antithetical to the mental state required for peak performance. The conversation had escalated when Emma pressed for specific examples of how her methods had interfered with team performance. She had pointed out that her suggestions were based on techniques used successfully by Olympic and professional shooters, programs that had achieved levels of success far beyond what their college team had accomplished. She had noted that her individual scores had improved consistently since implementing her modified training routine, while the team's competitive performance had remained stagnant. Coach Thompson's patience had finally run out. He had accused Emma of being disruptive, of undermining team chemistry with her constant questioning and analysis. He had suggested that her engineering background made her too focused on technical details at the expense of the mental aspects of shooting. Most damagingly, he had characterized her data-driven approach as evidence that she lacked the natural feel for shooting that separated good competitors from great ones. The final blow had come when Tyler and Jessica were called into the office to provide their perspective on Emma's role within the team dynamic. Both had expressed concerns about her tendency to overthink situations and her resistance to traditional coaching methods. Tyler had been particularly critical, suggesting that Emma's analytical approach created doubt and hesitation that affected other team members' confidence. Jessica had been more diplomatic but equally decisive, noting that Emma's suggestions often contradicted established team protocols. Coach Thompson had concluded the meeting by suggesting that Emma might be better suited to individual competition rather than team participation. He had offered to provide a recommendation letter for transfer to another program, one that might be more receptive to her analytical approach. The message had been clear. Her methods and her personality were incompatible with the team's culture and goals. Emma had left that meeting with her competitive world fundamentally altered. The team that had been her athletic home for 3 years had concluded that her greatest strengths, her analytical mind, her systematic approach to improvement, her willingness to question established methods, were actually liabilities that made her unsuitable for elite competition. She had been relegated from varsity team member to unwelcome outsider in the span of a single conversation. The following weeks had been among the most difficult of Emma's college career. She continued to attend classes and maintain her academic performance, but the shooting range that had once been her sanctuary now felt hostile and unwelcoming. Her former teammates treated her with polite distance, their previous friendships constrained by the awkwardness of her changed status. Coach Thompson nodded when they passed in the hallway, but offered no opportunities for reconciliation or compromise. Emma had considered quitting competitive shooting entirely. She could focus on her engineering studies, graduate with honors, and pursue a career that valued the analytical skills her coach had characterized as problematic. The sport that had defined her identity since childhood could become simply a recreational activity, something she enjoyed without the pressure of competition or the complications of team dynamics. But every morning when she woke up, Emma remembered her grandfather's voice during those early training sessions in the New Mexico desert. Carlos had taught her that shooting was about more than hitting targets. It was about discipline, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of doing something exactly right. He had shown her that excellence required both natural ability and systematic improvement, that the best shooters combined instinct with understanding. Most importantly, he had taught her that success belonged to those who refused to quit when others doubted their methods. The decision to join Rocky Mountain Gun Club had been both practical and symbolic. Emma needed a place to train if she wanted to maintain her competitive edge, and the civilian club offered excellent facilities at a reasonable cost. More significantly, the club represented independence from the institutional constraints that had limited her development as a shooter. Here, she could train according to her own methods, experiment with techniques that interested her, and pursue excellence without seeking approval from coaches or teammates who questioned her approach. The club's membership included a diverse group of shooters, from retired military personnel to weekend hunters to serious competitive athletes. Emma found herself welcomed by people who valued competence over conformity, who appreciated her systematic approach to training, and her willingness to share knowledge with other members. The informal mentorship she received from experienced shooters filled gaps in her education that no college program could have provided. Emma's transformation from team member to independent competitor had forced her to confront aspects of shooting that she had never fully appreciated while surrounded by the support structure of a college program. At Rocky Mountain Gun Club, she discovered that her engineering background provided advantages that went far beyond what her former coaches had recognized. The thin air at altitude affected bullet trajectory in ways that required precise calculation rather than intuitive adjustment. The variable mountain winds created complex patterns that demanded systematic analysis rather than simple observation. Her training sessions became increasingly sophisticated as she applied engineering principles to shooting problems that most competitors approached through trial and error. Emma constructed detailed weather logs that tracked wind speed and direction at 15-minute intervals throughout her practice sessions. She measured temperature variations across the range, noting how thermal layers affected bullet flight. At different times of day, her notebook expanded to include ballistic calculations for various atmospheric conditions, creating a reference system that allowed her to make precise adjustments without the lengthy experimentation that other shooters required. The other club members initially viewed Emma's methodical approach with curiosity rather than skepticism. Unlike her former teammates, these shooters had diverse backgrounds and training philosophies. Many had developed their own systematic approaches to accuracy improvement, and they recognized the value of Emma's scientific methodology even when they didn't fully understand its technical details. Several retired military members shared stories of precision shooting techniques they had learned during their service, adding practical wisdom to Emma's theoretical knowledge. Emma's equipment evolved along with her training methods. She modified her rifle stock to accommodate the different shooting positions required for competitive events, adjusting the length of pull and cheek rest height with the precision of a machinist. Her scope rings were positioned and torqued according to manufacturer specifications she had researched in technical manuals that most shooters never consulted. Every component of her shooting system was selected based on measurable performance criteria rather than marketing claims or popular opinion. The improvement in her shooting scores was gradual but undeniable. Where she had once struggled to maintain consistency across different conditions, Emma now adapted quickly to environmental changes by consulting her data and making calculated adjustments. Her groups became tighter, her calling of shots more accurate, her confidence in her equipment and technique more solid. The engineering discipline that had been characterized as overthinking was revealing itself as a systematic approach to excellence that her former coaches had failed to recognize. Emma's academic advisor, Professor Williams, had noticed the correlation between her renewed focus on shooting and her improved performance in her engineering coursework. The analytical skills she was developing at the range translated directly to her ability to solve complex technical problems in the classroom. Her senior design project, which involved optimizing manufacturing processes through statistical analysis, reflected the same methodical approach she applied to shooting performance improvement. Professor Williams had encouraged Emma to consider graduate school, recognizing that her ability to apply theoretical knowledge to practical problems would serve her well in advanced research. The conversation about her future had taken place during office hours on a crisp October afternoon, with golden aspen leaves visible through Professor Williams' window. Emma had been struggling with a decision about whether to pursue graduate school immediately after graduation or to seek employment in industry. The shooting situation had complicated her thinking about the future, creating uncertainty about whether she wanted to continue competing at a serious level or to focus entirely on her engineering career. Professor Williams had listened carefully as Emma described her situation with the shooting team, her current training routine at the civilian club, and her conflicted feelings about competitive sports. The professor's response had surprised Emma with its insight into aspects of her personality that she hadn't fully recognized herself. Professor Williams had pointed out that Emma's approach to both engineering and shooting reflected a fundamental belief in the power of systematic improvement, a confidence that complex problems could be solved through careful analysis and methodical effort. The professor had suggested that Emma's experience with the shooting team, while personally difficult, had actually revealed strengths that would serve her well in any technical field. The ability to challenge established methods when data suggested better approaches was essential for innovation in engineering. The willingness to work independently when institutional support was lacking was crucial for entrepreneurial success. The persistence to continue improving despite criticism from authority figures was a hallmark of the most successful researchers and inventors. Professor Williams had also noted that Emma's shooting discipline could provide a valuable outlet for stress management during the demanding years of graduate school or early career development. Many successful engineers maintained recreational activities that required precision and focus, finding that the mental skills developed through these pursuits enhanced their professional performance. The professor had encouraged Emma to view her shooting not as a distraction from her academic goals, but as a complementary activity that strengthened her overall capabilities. The conversation had concluded with Professor Williams offering to serve as a reference for Emma's graduate school applications, while also encouraging her to continue developing her shooting skills. The professor had shared stories of colleagues who had maintained competitive athletics throughout their academic careers, noting that the discipline and time management required for success in both arenas often produced exceptional professionals. Emma had left the meeting with a clearer understanding of how her various interests and abilities could work together rather than competing for her attention. The decision to apply for individual competition licenses had emerged from this new perspective on her future. Emma researched the requirements for participating in national-level shooting competitions as an unattached competitor, discovering that her scores and experience qualified her for several prestigious events. The process was more complex than team-based competition, requiring her to handle registration, travel arrangements, and equipment transportation without institutional support. However, the independence also meant that she could compete according to her own preparation methods and schedule without seeking approval from coaches or teammates. Emma's first step was to establish her competitive credentials through a series of regional matches where she could test her skills against serious competition while gaining experience with the administrative aspects of individual participation. She selected events based on their reputations for attracting strong fields and providing fair, well-organized competition. Her goal was not just to achieve qualifying scores, but to demonstrate that her training methods could produce success against opponents who had the advantages of professional coaching and team support. The registration process for her first major competition had been both exciting and intimidating. Emma found herself listed among competitors from prestigious university programs and shooting clubs with decades of tradition. Her affiliation was simply listed as Rocky Mountain Gun Club, without the institutional prestige that surrounded many of her opponents. The entry fee represented a significant financial commitment for a college student, but Emma viewed it as an investment in her development as both a shooter and a person. Her preparation for competition intensified as the event dates approached. Emma's training sessions became more focused on simulating match conditions, with specific attention to the mental pressures that could affect performance when results mattered most. She practiced shooting with artificial time constraints, with background noise played through earphones, and with her score being recorded by observers who evaluated her technique. The goal was to make actual competition feel familiar rather than foreign, reducing the stress that could interfere with the precision her success required. The equipment preparation for her first major competition reflected Emma's engineering background in its thoroughness and attention to detail. She created detailed checklists for rifle preparation, ammunition selection, and accessory verification. Her ammunition was loaded with components selected through extensive testing, with each round measured and weighed to ensure consistency. Her rifle was cleaned and inspected according to a schedule that guaranteed optimal performance without the risk of equipment problems during critical stages of competition. Emma's mental preparation incorporated techniques she had researched from sports psychology literature, adapted to her specific needs and personality. She developed visualization routines that allowed her to mentally rehearse perfect shots under various conditions, building confidence in her ability to execute her technique when pressure was highest. Her pre-shot routine was refined through hundreds of repetitions until it became automatic, providing a reliable framework for consistency regardless of external circumstances. The drive to her first major competition took Emma through mountain passes where early snow dusted the peaks with white, creating scenery that reminded her of training sessions with her grandfather in similarly rugged terrain. Carlos had always emphasized that shooting well required more than technical skill. It demanded the kind of mental toughness that allowed a person to perform at their best when everything was on the line. Emma felt his presence as she navigated the winding roads toward a competition that would test everything she had learned about shooting and about herself. Her arrival at the competition venue confirmed both her hopes and her concerns about the level of opposition she would face. The parking area was filled with vehicles displaying stickers from elite shooting programs, and the equipment being unloaded represented thousands of dollars in specialized gear. Emma's setup was functional, but modest compared to some of the custom rifles and precision accessories she observed. However, she also noticed that the most experienced competitors handled their equipment with the kind of casual confidence that suggested familiarity bred through extensive use rather than recent acquisition. The registration process provided Emma's first opportunity to interact with competitors from programs she had only read about in shooting sports publications. Most were friendly and welcoming, sharing the kind of camaraderie that develops among people who understand the demands of precision shooting. Several expressed curiosity about her training methods and her decision to compete as an individual, rather than as part of a team program. Emma found these conversations encouraging, reinforcing her belief that serious shooters respected competence and dedication regardless of institutional affiliation. Emma's equipment inspection went smoothly, with range officials confirming that her rifle and accessories met all competition requirements. Her ammunition passed chronograph testing with velocity spreads that drew approving comments from the technical staff. The match director noted that Emma's documentation was among the most thorough he had reviewed, with detailed specifications for every component of her shooting system. The preparation that her former teammates had characterized as excessive was recognized here as evidence of serious commitment to competitive excellence. The practice sessions before formal competition began allowed Emma to familiarize herself with the range conditions and to verify that her equipment was performing as expected. The altitude was higher than her training location, requiring slight adjustments to her scope settings based on the ballistic calculations she had prepared in advance. The wind patterns were more consistent than the variable conditions she had trained in, actually simplifying the reading and adjustment process she had practiced extensively. Emma's performance during practice sessions attracted attention from other competitors and officials who recognized skilled shooting when they observed it. Her groups were consistently tight, her position work was technically sound, and her tempo reflected the kind of rhythm that develops through extensive training. Several competitors approached her between relays to discuss technique and equipment choices, conversations that revealed the depth of knowledge she had developed through her systematic approach to the sport. The evening before the first day of formal competition, Emma called her grandfather from her hotel room to share her experiences and to seek his advice about the mental preparation required for serious competition. Carlos listened carefully as she described the venue, the competition, and her feelings about the challenge ahead. His response combined the practical wisdom of a veteran competitor with the loving support of a family member who understood what this opportunity meant to her development as a person. Carlos reminded Emma that competition was simply an opportunity to demonstrate skills that had been developed through patient practice, that the shooting itself was no different from the thousands of shots she had fired in preparation. He emphasized that her engineering background provided advantages that many competitors lacked, particularly the ability to analyze conditions systematically and to make adjustments based on data rather than emotion. Most importantly, he reminded her that she was competing for herself rather than to satisfy the expectations of others, freeing her to shoot with the confidence that came from authentic motivation. The conversation concluded with Carlos sharing a story from his military service about the importance of trusting preparation when external circumstances were beyond control. He described a difficult shot he had made during combat operations, explaining how his training had provided the foundation for success even when conditions were far from ideal. The lesson was that thorough preparation created a reserve of confidence that could be drawn upon when pressure was highest, that the work done in private practice sessions ultimately determined performance when results mattered most. Emma spent the remainder of the evening reviewing her shooting logs and mentally rehearsing her competition routine. She visualized each stage of the match, from equipment setup through the final shot, imagining herself executing her technique with the precision that had characterized her best training sessions. Her preparation was complete in every way she could control, leaving only the execution that would determine whether her months of independent training had prepared her for success at the highest levels of collegiate competition. The morning of competition dawned clear and still, with the kind of perfect conditions that favor precision shooting and eliminate weather as an excuse for poor performance. Emma's pre-competition routine unfolded according to the schedule she had developed. Through trial and refinement, each element timed to optimize her physical and mental readiness without creating unnecessary stress. Her equipment check confirmed that everything was functioning exactly as expected, providing the foundation for confidence that would carry her through the demanding hours ahead. As Emma took her position on the firing line for the first stage of competition, she felt the culmination of everything that had brought her to this moment. The months of solitary training, the systematic development of her skills, the patient accumulation of knowledge about shooting in variable conditions, and the quiet confidence that came from thorough preparation all converged into readiness for the test that would measure her true capabilities against the best competition she had ever faced. The range commands that initiated formal competition represented more than the beginning of a shooting match for Emma. They marked the moment when her decision to pursue excellence through independent effort would be measured against the institutional advantages that her opponents possessed. The engineering student who had been dismissed as an overthinker was about to demonstrate whether systematic preparation and analytical thinking could compete with traditional coaching methods and team support in the arena where precision shooting skills were tested most severely. Emma's first shot of the competition was fired with the same deliberate precision that had characterized her training sessions, the rifle speaking with authority as the bullet traced its path toward the target. That would provide the first measurement of her competitive readiness. Through her scope, she watched the impact appear exactly where her calculations and experience had predicted, confirming that her preparation had been successful and that her confidence in her methods was justified by measurable results. The systematic approach that had been criticized by her former teammates now revealed itself as a competitive advantage that allowed Emma to maintain consistency while her opponents struggled to adapt to conditions that differed from their familiar training environments. Her data-driven preparation provided a foundation for performance that was independent of external validation or institutional support, demonstrating that excellence could be achieved through individual effort guided by scientific principles and sustained by authentic motivation. Emma's early performance in the competition established her as a serious contender rather than an unknown participant, her scores reflecting the kind of precision that typically characterized only the most elite competitors. The engineering student who had been relegated to civilian club training was demonstrating that her systematic approach to shooting could produce results that rivaled or exceeded those achieved through traditional coaching methods and team-based preparation programs. Her shooting rhythm settled into the pattern she had developed through hundreds of hours of practice, each shot fired according to the routine that had been refined through systematic experimentation and careful analysis. The confidence that came from thorough preparation allowed Emma to focus entirely on execution rather than second-guessing her methods or questioning her readiness for this level of competition. The analytical approach that had been characterized as overthinking was revealing itself as a pathway to the kind of mental clarity that serious competition demanded. The first stage of competition concluded with Emma positioned among the leaders, her scores reflecting performance that exceeded her most optimistic expectations, while confirming that her preparation had been appropriate for this level of challenge. The engineering student who had been dismissed from her college team was demonstrating that individual effort, guided by systematic analysis, could compete successfully against opponents who possessed every institutional advantage that elite shooting programs could provide. As Emma prepared for the subsequent stages of competition, she carried with her the growing confidence that came from successful execution under pressure and the knowledge that her months of independent training had prepared her for exactly this moment. The systematic approach that had been criticized by traditional coaches was proving its worth in the arena where precision shooting skills were tested most rigorously, demonstrating that excellence could be achieved through multiple pathways. When effort was sustained by authentic motivation and guided by scientific principles, the conversation that would ultimately lead to Emma's dismissal from the Northern State shooting team had its origins in a post-practice discussion that began innocently enough. Coach Thompson had been reviewing the team's recent performance at a regional qualifier, expressing concern about their inability to maintain practice-level accuracy during actual competition. Emma had listened carefully to his analysis, recognizing patterns that aligned with observations she had been tracking in her personal shooting logs for several weeks. Emma's initial contribution to the discussion had been measured and respectful, offering specific examples of how environmental differences between their practice facility and competition venues might be affecting the team's performance. She had noted that their indoor range provided consistent lighting and eliminated wind variables, creating training conditions that failed to prepare them for the challenges they would face in serious competition. Her suggestion had been simple: incorporate outdoor practice sessions into their routine to better simulate match conditions. Coach Thompson's response had revealed the philosophical differences that would ultimately make Emma's position on the team untenable. He explained that shooting was fundamentally about developing muscle memory and mental confidence through repetition, that introducing variables during practice would undermine the consistency they had worked so hard to achieve. His approach emphasized the development of a reliable technique that would perform regardless of external conditions, based on the belief that mental toughness could overcome environmental challenges. Emma had respectfully disagreed with this assessment, sharing research she had discovered about adaptive training methods used by Olympic shooting programs. She explained that exposure to variable conditions during practice actually improved performers' ability to adjust when competition environments differed from their training facilities. Her suggestion was not to abandon their current methods, but to supplement them with sessions that would broaden their range of capabilities. The discussion had continued for several minutes, with Emma providing increasingly detailed explanations of her position, while Coach Thompson became visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Tyler Matthews and Jessica Park had joined the discussion, initially curious about Emma's research, but gradually aligning themselves with their coach's more traditional perspective. The conversation had concluded without resolution, but Emma had sensed a shift in the team's dynamic that made her question her place within the group. Over the following weeks, Emma had noticed subtle changes in how her teammates and coach interacted with her. Her suggestions during practice sessions were acknowledged but not implemented. Her questions about technique modifications were answered briefly and dismissed. Most significantly, she found herself excluded from the informal conversations that occurred before and after practice, where team strategy and equipment decisions were often discussed among the core group members. Emma's response to this social isolation had been to focus more intensively on her individual improvement, spending additional hours analyzing her performance and researching advanced shooting techniques. Her shooting scores remained strong, but she began to feel like an outsider within the team structure rather than a valued contributor to their collective success. The engineering mindset that drove her to seek optimal solutions was increasingly viewed as disruptive rather than helpful. The breaking point had arrived when Emma prepared a detailed analysis of the team's performance trends, complete with statistical comparisons and recommendations for improvement. She had spent weeks collecting data, consulting academic sources, and preparing a presentation that she believed would demonstrate the value of her analytical approach. Her intention was to contribute to the team's success by applying her engineering skills to identify areas where their performance could be enhanced. Emma's presentation had been thorough and professional, incorporating performance data from their recent competitions along with research from sports science literature. She had identified specific areas where their scores diverged from their practice performance, suggesting that certain aspects of their preparation could be modified to improve their competitive consistency. Her recommendations were modest and carefully justified, designed to enhance rather than replace their existing training methods. Coach Thompson's reaction to Emma's presentation had been swift and definitive. He had expressed appreciation for her effort while making it clear that her analytical approach was fundamentally incompatible with the team's philosophy. He explained that shooting was an art as much as a science, that the kind of systematic analysis Emma favored could create mental obstacles that interfered with the instinctive responses required for peak performance. The coach had gone on to characterize Emma's engineering background as both an asset and a liability for competitive shooting. While her technical knowledge helped her understand equipment and ballistics, her tendency to analyze every aspect of performance created the kind of mental complexity that could undermine the confidence and flow state that serious competition required. He suggested that Emma's approach might be better suited to individual competition rather than team-based events. Tyler Matthews had supported Coach Thompson's assessment, noting that Emma's constant analysis and questioning had begun to affect other team members' confidence in their established techniques. He argued that the team's success depended on shared commitment to proven methods rather than continuous experimentation with unproven alternatives. Jessica Park had agreed, suggesting that Emma's focus on data and measurement had created an atmosphere of doubt rather than confidence within the team structure. Emma had attempted to address these concerns, by explaining that her analytical approach was intended to support rather than replace their existing methods. That understanding, the scientific principles behind their techniques, could actually strengthen their confidence and consistency. She had noted that many elite athletes in other sports use systematic analysis to optimize their performance without sacrificing the mental clarity required for competition success. Coach Thompson had concluded the meeting by suggesting that Emma's future with the team would depend on her willingness to adapt her approach to align with their established philosophy. He had made it clear that her technical contributions were valued, but that her tendency to question and analyze needed to be balanced with acceptance of traditional methods that had proven successful over time. The message had been clear: conform to the team's culture or find alternative arrangements for her competitive shooting. Emma had left that meeting with a clear understanding that her position on the team was conditional on abandoning the analytical approach that she believed was essential to her continued improvement as a shooter. The choice was between remaining part of a team that required her to suppress her strongest capabilities or pursuing independent development that would allow her to fully utilize her engineering background in service of shooting excellence. The decision to leave the team had been difficult, but ultimately liberating for Emma. Rather than continuing to fight for acceptance within an institutional structure that viewed her greatest strengths as problematic, she had chosen to pursue excellence through methods that aligned with her natural abilities and interests. The transition from team member to independent competitor had required her to assume responsibilities that had previously been handled by coaches and support staff. But it had also provided the freedom to train according to her own methods and schedule. Emma's experience with the Northern State shooting team had taught her valuable lessons about institutional dynamics and the challenges faced by individuals whose approaches differed from established norms. The rejection she had experienced had been personally painful but professionally instructive, revealing the importance of finding environments where individual strengths could be utilized rather than suppressed. Her engineering background had prepared her to analyze problems systematically and to develop solutions based on data rather than tradition, skills that would serve her well in both her technical career and her continued pursuit of shooting excellence. Emma's training regimen at Rocky Mountain Gun Club had evolved into something far more sophisticated than anything she had experienced during her years with the university team. The freedom to experiment with different techniques and equipment configurations had allowed her to develop a systematic approach to accuracy improvement that incorporated principles from multiple disciplines. Her engineering background provided the analytical framework. Her grandfather's military training contributed practical wisdom about precision shooting under pressure, and her own extensive experimentation yielded insights that no textbook or coach could have provided. The morning routine that had become Emma's signature began before dawn, when the mountain air was still and the range conditions were most predictable. She arrived at the club as the first hint of light appeared behind the eastern peaks, carrying equipment that reflected years of careful selection and modification. Her rifle case contained not just her primary competition rifle, but also the specialized tools and reference materials that supported her systematic approach to training. Every component had been chosen based on measurable performance criteria, rather than marketing claims or popular opinion among other shooters. Emma's pre-shooting preparation followed a checklist that would have impressed any quality control engineer. She began by recording environmental conditions in detail, measuring wind speed and direction at multiple points across the range, noting temperature and humidity levels, and documenting the clarity and angle of available light. These measurements were entered into a leather-bound logbook that had belonged to her grandfather, creating a database of range conditions that allowed her to identify patterns and correlations that less systematic shooters missed entirely. The equipment setup process reflected Emma's belief that consistency in preparation led directly to consistency in performance. Her shooting mat was positioned with mathematical precision, aligned to compass bearings that ensured identical orientation regardless of which firing point she occupied. Her rifle rest was adjusted to predetermined settings that had been optimized through extensive testing under various conditions. Her ammunition was arranged in a specific pattern that minimized handling time while ensuring that each round was selected according to the systematic rotation she used to maintain consistent lot characteristics. Emma's warm-up routine incorporated elements from both traditional marksmanship training and modern sports science research. She began with dry-fire exercises that reinforced proper trigger technique, while allowing her to verify that her scope settings were appropriate for current conditions. Her breathing exercises were adapted from meditation practices that helped establish the kind of mental calm required for precision shooting. Her position work emphasized the development of natural point of aim that would remain stable throughout extended shooting sessions. The actual shooting portion of Emma's training was structured around specific objectives that were defined in advance and evaluated systematically afterward. Rather than simply firing groups for score, she practiced scenarios that simulated different aspects of competitive shooting. Some sessions focused on rapid position changes that tested her ability to maintain accuracy while working within time constraints. Others emphasized shooting in variable wind conditions that required constant adjustment and adaptation. Still others concentrated on the mental aspects of performance, with Emma deliberately introducing stressors that would help her maintain focus during actual competition. Emma's ballistic calculations had become increasingly sophisticated as her understanding of external factors improved. She maintained detailed records of how different atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectory, creating reference tables that allowed her to make precise adjustments without the trial and error approach that most shooters employed. Her ammunition loading process incorporated lessons learned from precision manufacturing, with each cartridge assembled according to specifications that had been developed through extensive testing and statistical analysis. The improvement in Emma's shooting performance had been gradual but undeniable. Her group sizes had decreased steadily as her technique became more refined and her understanding of equipment capabilities deepened. More importantly, her ability to maintain accuracy across different conditions had improved dramatically, reflecting the adaptive skills that her systematic training approach was designed to develop. The consistency that had occasionally eluded her during team practice sessions was now a reliable characteristic of her individual performance. Emma's relationship with other club members had evolved from polite acknowledgement to genuine respect for her analytical approach and willingness to share knowledge. Several experienced shooters had begun asking her advice about equipment modifications and training techniques, recognizing that her engineering background provided insights that complemented their own practical experience. The collaborative atmosphere at the civilian club was markedly different from the competitive dynamics she had experienced with the university team, where knowledge sharing was often limited by concerns about individual advantage. One of the most significant relationships Emma had developed was with Frank Morrison, a retired Army sniper who had competed successfully in precision rifle competitions for more than 2 decades. Frank's military background provided a different perspective on accuracy requirements and mental preparation, while his competitive experience offered practical insights about the demands of serious shooting competition. Their conversations had become a regular feature of Emma's training sessions, with Frank sharing wisdom that no civilian coach could have provided. Frank had initially been skeptical of Emma's systematic approach, having learned his shooting skills through military training that emphasized rapid adaptation over detailed analysis. However, he had gradually come to appreciate how Emma's engineering methodology could enhance, rather than replace, the intuitive skills that effective shooting required. Their discussions often focused on the balance between scientific understanding and practical application, with both recognizing that elite performance required elements of both approaches. The technical aspects of Emma's preparation had attracted Frank's particular interest, especially her approach to ballistic calculations and environmental assessment. His military training had provided extensive experience with precision shooting under adverse conditions, but Emma's systematic documentation of performance variables offered insights that could improve even experienced shooters' consistency. Frank had begun incorporating some of Emma's analytical techniques into his own training, while sharing practical tips about mental preparation and equipment management that enhanced Emma's competitive readiness. Emma's academic performance had actually improved since her departure from the university shooting team, contradicting the conventional wisdom that athletic participation suffered when students focused exclusively on coursework. The analytical skills she was developing through systematic shooting training translated directly to her engineering projects, while the stress management techniques required for competitive shooting helped her maintain focus during demanding academic periods. Professor Williams had noted the improvement in Emma's problem-solving approach, recognizing that her shooting discipline was contributing to rather than detracting from her academic development. The senior design project that would serve as Emma's capstone academic experience had been inspired partly by her shooting-related research into precision manufacturing and quality control. Her project involved developing improved methods for measuring and reducing variability in manufacturing processes, applying statistical techniques that paralleled her approach to shooting consistency improvement. The mathematical models she was developing for her academic work incorporated lessons learned from analyzing shooting performance under different conditions. Emma's decision to apply for individual competition in national-level shooting events had been influenced by conversations with Frank Morrison about the realities of elite competition. Frank had competed successfully against shooters from major university programs and military teams, demonstrating that individual competitors could achieve success against institutionally supported opponents when their preparation was thorough and their mental approach was sound. His encouragement had provided the confidence Emma needed to pursue competition at levels she had never previously considered accessible. The application process for national competition had required Emma to demonstrate her competitive qualifications through verified scores from sanctioned events. Her participation in regional matches during the fall semester had provided the necessary documentation while also giving her experience with the administrative and logistical demands of serious competition. The scores she had achieved exceeded the minimum requirements by comfortable margins, establishing her credentials as a legitimate competitor rather than an ambitious amateur. Emma's preparation for national-level competition had required investments in equipment and training that stretched her budget as a college student but represented essential elements of competitive readiness. Her rifle had been upgraded with components that met the specifications required for elite competition, while her ammunition loading equipment had been enhanced to achieve the consistency standards that serious competition demanded. The costs were significant, but Emma viewed them as investments in her development as both a shooter and an engineer. The mental preparation required for national competition had proven more challenging than the technical aspects for Emma, while her analytical approach provided confidence in her equipment and technique. The psychological pressure of competing against the best shooters in the country created stresses that required different management strategies. Frank Morrison had shared techniques from his military experience for maintaining focus under pressure, while Emma had researched sports psychology methods used by Olympic athletes in precision sports. Emma's training intensity had increased significantly as the national competition date approached. Her daily practice sessions became longer and more focused, with specific attention to the skills that would be tested most severely during actual competition. She practiced shooting with artificial time constraints that simulated match conditions, worked on position transitions that would be required during rapid-fire stages, and refined her wind-reading abilities through exposure to the variable conditions that mountain weather provided. The equipment preparation for national competition reflected Emma's engineering background in its thoroughness and attention to detail. Every component of her shooting system was inspected, tested, and documented, according to standards that exceeded typical competitive requirements. Her ammunition was loaded with components that had been selected through extensive testing, with each round measured and verified to ensure consistency. Her rifle was cleaned and maintained according to a schedule that guaranteed optimal performance, without risking equipment problems during critical competition stages. Emma's mental preparation incorporated visualization techniques that allowed her to rehearse perfect performance under various competitive scenarios. She practiced managing the stress responses that could interfere with precision shooting, developing routines that would maintain her focus regardless of external pressures or competitive circumstances. The confidence that came from thorough preparation provided a foundation for performance that was independent of validation from coaches or teammates. The week before national competition, Emma received an unexpected phone call from Coach Thompson, who had apparently been following her competitive results through shooting sports publications. His tone was markedly different from their final conversation months earlier, reflecting what seemed to be genuine respect for her achievements as an individual competitor. He expressed curiosity about her training methods and suggested that the university team might benefit from incorporating some of her analytical approaches into their preparation. Emma's response to Coach Thompson's overture was polite but non-committal. While she harbored no resentment toward her former teammates or coach, she had moved beyond the need for institutional validation of her methods. Her success as an individual competitor had demonstrated that her systematic approach could produce results that rivaled or exceeded those achieved through traditional coaching methods. The conversation concluded with Coach Thompson wishing her success in national competition, though Emma sensed that his interest was motivated more by curiosity about her techniques than by genuine concern for her welfare. The final week of preparation before national competition had been structured around maintaining peak readiness without overtraining or creating unnecessary stress. Emma's practice sessions became shorter but more focused, emphasizing the execution of skills that had been developed through months of systematic training. She reviewed her competition equipment one final time, verified that her travel arrangements were complete, and spent time mentally rehearsing the routines that would guide her performance when competitive pressure was highest. Emma's grandfather had called the evening before her departure for national competition, offering encouragement and reminding her of lessons that had been learned during their early training sessions in the New Mexico desert. Carlos emphasized that competition was simply an opportunity to demonstrate skills that had been developed through patient practice, that the shooting itself was no different from the thousands of shots she had fired in preparation. His reminder that she was competing for herself rather than to satisfy others' expectations provided the final element of mental preparation Emma needed. The drive to Denver for national competition took Emma through familiar mountain scenery that reminded her of training sessions at Rocky Mountain Gun Club, where she had developed the skills and confidence that made her current opportunity possible. The equipment in her vehicle represented years of careful selection and modification, while the notebooks containing her training data documented the systematic approach that had transformed her from a dismissed team member into a serious national competitor. Emma's arrival at the National Sports Center confirmed both the magnitude of the challenge she faced and her readiness to compete at this level. The facility was impressive in its scope and sophistication, with ranges designed specifically for elite competition and support services that exceeded anything she had experienced during her university team years. The other competitors represented the finest shooting programs in the country, with equipment and support systems that reflected significant institutional investment in competitive success. The registration process provided Emma's first opportunity to interact with competitors and officials who represented the highest levels of collegiate shooting. Her documentation was thorough and professional, reflecting the systematic approach that characterized every aspect of her preparation. Several range officials noted the quality of her equipment and the completeness of her paperwork, comments that suggested her individual preparation had met standards typically associated with major team programs. Emma's equipment inspection passed without issues, confirming that her rifle and accessories met all competition requirements while performing at levels that would support elite-level shooting. Her ammunition chronographed with velocity spreads that impressed the technical staff, while her ballistic calculations were recognized as among the most thorough they had reviewed. The preparation that had been characterized as excessive by her former teammates was acknowledged here as evidence of serious competitive commitment. The practice sessions before formal competition began allowed Emma to familiarize herself with the range conditions while verifying that her equipment was performing as expected. The altitude was slightly higher than her training location, requiring minor adjustments to her scope settings based on ballistic calculations she had prepared in advance. The wind patterns were more predictable than the variable mountain conditions she had trained in, actually simplifying the environmental assessment process she had practiced extensively. Emma's performance during practice sessions attracted attention from competitors and officials who recognized skilled shooting when they observed it. Her groups were consistently tight, her technique was fundamentally sound, and her tempo reflected the kind of rhythm that develops through extensive training under proper instruction. Several competitors approached her between practice sessions to discuss equipment choices and technique details, conversations that revealed the depth of knowledge she had developed through her systematic approach to shooting improvement. The evening before the first day of formal competition, Emma called Frank Morrison to share her observations about the venue and competition field, while seeking his advice about mental preparation for serious competitive pressure. Frank listened carefully as she described the facility, the quality of her opponents, and her confidence in her preparation. His response combined practical wisdom about competitive shooting with encouragement, based on his assessment of her capabilities and readiness. Frank reminded Emma that her systematic preparation provided advantages that many competitors lacked, particularly the ability to analyze conditions quickly and make adjustments based on data rather than guesswork. He emphasized that her engineering background had taught her to trust proven methods rather than being influenced by the pressure or distractions that could affect less prepared competitors. Most importantly, he reminded her that she had earned her place in this competition through merit rather than institutional support, demonstrating that her individual approach was capable of producing results at the highest competitive levels. The conversation concluded with Frank sharing observations from his own competitive experience about the importance of maintaining focus on process rather than results during actual competition. He explained that the best competitors concentrated on executing their established routines rather than trying to achieve specific scores, trusting that proper execution would produce appropriate results. The lesson was that thorough preparation created a foundation for performance that could be relied upon regardless of external circumstances or competitive pressure. Emma spent the remainder of the evening reviewing her competition routine and mentally rehearsing the procedures that would guide her performance during the following days. She visualized each stage of the competition, from equipment setup through the final scoring, imagining herself executing her technique with the precision that had characterized her best training sessions. Her preparation was complete in every controllable aspect, leaving only the execution that would determine whether her months of individual training had prepared her for success against the finest collegiate competition in the country. The morning of the NCAA National Rifle Championships dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that only Denver's altitude could provide, the thin air carrying sounds farther and making colors appear more vivid against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks visible through the facility's floor-to-ceiling windows. Emma Rodriguez arrived at the National Sports Center 90 minutes before her scheduled equipment check, following the routine she had refined through months of systematic preparation. Her equipment bag rolled silently across the polished concrete floors, its contents representing not just the tools of precision shooting, but the culmination of a journey that had transformed her from dismissed team member to legitimate national competitor. The warm-up bay, assigned to individual competitors, was smaller than the spaces allocated to major university teams, but Emma found the relative isolation conducive to her mental preparation routine. She unpacked her equipment with the methodical precision that had become second nature, each component placed in its predetermined position, according to a layout that minimized setup time while ensuring nothing was forgotten or misplaced. Her rifle emerged from its custom case like a precision instrument designed for a specific purpose, its every surface reflecting hundreds of hours of careful maintenance and modification. Emma's pre-competition inspection of her rifle revealed the attention to detail that distinguished serious competitors from recreational shooters. Every screw had been checked and retorqued according to manufacturer specifications she had researched in technical manuals that most shooters never consulted. Her scope had been mounted and verified using procedures borrowed from precision manufacturing, ensuring that mechanical zero remained consistent regardless of transportation stress or environmental changes. The trigger mechanism had been adjusted and tested to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, providing the kind of predictable release that eliminated one variable from the complex equation of accurate shooting. The ammunition Emma had prepared for this competition represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of her systematic approach to shooting excellence. Each cartridge had been assembled using components selected through extensive testing, with bullets sorted by weight to tolerances measured in tenths of grains. The powder charges had been weighed individually rather than thrown from a measure, ensuring consistency that would translate directly to velocity uniformity and trajectory predictability. Her brass cases had been prepared using techniques borrowed from bencherous competition, where accuracy standards exceeded even those required for elite collegiate shooting. Emma's ballistic calculations for the Denver altitude had been prepared weeks in advance, incorporating atmospheric data from historical weather records and verified through test firing at a similar elevation during a weekend trip to a range in the Colorado mountains. Her scope adjustments were recorded in a waterproof notebook that contained environmental corrections for every conceivable combination of temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. The systematic approach that had been dismissed as overthinking by her former teammates was revealing itself as a competitive advantage that allowed her to adapt quickly to conditions that challenged less prepared opponents. The first stage of competition was precision shooting from the prone position, a discipline that favored shooters with superior technique and equipment preparation over those who relied primarily on natural ability. Emma's position work reflected years of refinement guided by her grandfather's military training and enhanced by her own experimentation with biomechanical efficiency. Her natural point of aim was established through a procedure that ensured consistency regardless of nervousness or external pressure, providing a foundation for accuracy that would remain stable throughout the demanding competition schedule. Emma's breathing routine incorporated elements from both traditional marksmanship training and meditation practices she had researched in sports psychology literature. The controlled respiration pattern served dual purposes, providing the physical stability required for precision shooting, while also managing the stress responses that could interfere with mental clarity under competitive pressure. Her technique had been refined through hundreds of practice sessions where she deliberately introduced stressors to simulate the psychological challenges of serious competition. The range commands that initiated formal competition represented the moment when Emma's months of individual preparation would be tested against opponents who possessed every institutional advantage that elite collegiate programs could provide. Her first shot was fired with deliberate confidence, the rifle speaking with authority as the bullet traced its calculated path through the thin mountain air. Through her spotting scope, she watched the impact appear precisely where her ballistic calculations and wind assessment had predicted, confirming that her systematic preparation had accurately anticipated the conditions she would face. Emma's shooting rhythm settled into the pattern she had developed through extensive practice. Each shot fired according to a routine that eliminated variables while maintaining the tempo required for competitive efficiency. Her sight adjustments were minimal and precise, based on environmental readings rather than shot-to-shot corrections that could introduce cumulative errors. The engineering discipline that guided her approach manifested itself in consistent execution that contrasted sharply with the more intuitive methods employed by many of her opponents. The electronic scoring system provided real-time feedback that confirmed Emma's early dominance in the prone precision stage. Her group size was among the smallest recorded, while her shot placement demonstrated the kind of consistency that typically characterized only the most elite competitors. Spectators and officials began to take notice of the individual competitor, whose methodical approach was producing results that rivaled those of shooters from prestigious university programs with decades of competitive tradition. Emma's performance attracted the attention of collegiate coaches who recognized exceptional shooting when they observed it, regardless of the shooter's institutional affiliation. Her technique was fundamentally sound in ways that reflected extensive training under knowledgeable instruction, while her equipment management suggested familiarity with the highest levels of competitive shooting. Several coaches approached her between stages to inquire about her training background and future plans, conversations that revealed both respect for her current performance and interest in her potential continued development. The second stage of competition transitioned to standing position shooting, a discipline that tested shooters' ability to maintain accuracy without the stability provided by ground support. Emma's standing position had been developed through analysis of biomechanical principles, combined with practical experimentation guided by Frank Morrison's military experience. Her stance was stable and repeatable, providing a platform for precision that remained consistent despite the physical demands of extended standing shooting. Emma's performance in the standing stage exceeded even her own expectations, her scores reflecting the systematic training approach that had prepared her for every aspect of elite competition. Her shot group was notably tighter than those of most opponents, while her shooting tempo demonstrated the kind of rhythm that develops through extensive practice under knowledgeable guidance. The confidence that came from thorough preparation allowed her to maintain focus on execution rather than becoming distracted by competitive pressure or external circumstances. The midday break between competition stages provided Emma with an opportunity to verify her equipment and assess her position relative to other competitors. Her scores placed her in second position overall, trailing only a shooter from a prestigious Western University program by a margin small enough to be overcome during the afternoon session. The mathematical precision of her shooting had established her as a legitimate contender for individual championship rather than simply a participant. Gaining experience at the national level, Emma's lunch routine followed the nutrition plan she had developed in consultation with sports science research, emphasizing foods that would maintain energy levels without creating digestive stress that could affect her shooting performance. Her meal was consumed in solitude, away from the social dynamics that characterized team-based preparation, allowing her to maintain the mental clarity that her systematic approach required. The isolation that had once felt like rejection now provided the competitive advantage of undisturbed focus. The afternoon session began with rapid-fire stages that tested competitors' ability to maintain accuracy while working within strict time constraints. Emma's preparation for these events had incorporated timing drills that simulated competitive pressure while building familiarity with the tempo required for success. Her rapid-fire technique emphasized smooth position transitions and consistent sight alignment rather than pure speed, trusting that proper execution would produce appropriate times without sacrificing accuracy. Emma's performance during rapid-fire stages demonstrated the adaptability that her systematic training approach had been designed to develop. Her scores remained consistently high despite the increased pressure and reduced time for each shot, reflecting preparation that had anticipated every aspect of elite competition. Her technique remained fundamentally unchanged from slower precision stages, providing consistency that many competitors struggled to maintain when circumstances became more demanding. The final stage of competition was precision shooting from the kneeling position, a discipline that combined the stability challenges of standing shooting with the accuracy requirements of prone work. Emma's kneeling position had been refined through extensive experimentation with different configurations, ultimately settling on a technique that provided maximum stability while remaining comfortable during extended shooting sessions. Her preparation had included practice sessions specifically designed to simulate the fatigue factors that could affect performance during the final stages of day-long competition. Emma's shooting during the final stage reflected the accumulation of everything she had learned about competitive shooting through her systematic approach to excellence. Her shots were placed with mathematical precision, each impact appearing exactly where her calculations and technique indicated it should. Her shooting rhythm remained steady and controlled, unaffected by the knowledge that her performance was being evaluated by spectators who represented the finest shooting programs. In collegiate athletics, the electronic scoring system confirmed what spectators had observed throughout the day. Emma Rodriguez, the individual competitor from Rocky Mountain Gun Club, had achieved scores that exceeded those of every team-based shooter in the field. Her total score established a new individual record for unattached competitors, while placing her comfortably ahead of the second-place finisher from a major university program. The engineering student who had been dismissed from her college team had demonstrated that systematic preparation and individual effort could triumph over institutional advantages and traditional coaching methods. Emma's victory ceremony was attended by coaches, competitors, and officials who had witnessed an exceptional demonstration of competitive shooting excellence. Her gold medal represented more than individual achievement. It symbolized the validation of an approach to shooting that emphasized scientific understanding over traditional intuition, systematic preparation over institutional support, and individual determination over group conformity. The quiet engineering student had proven that excellence could be achieved through multiple pathways, when effort was guided by sound principles and sustained by authentic motivation. The conversations that followed Emma's victory revealed the impact her success had made on observers who represented every level of competitive shooting. Coaches from major university programs expressed interest in her training methods, recognizing that her systematic approach offered insights that could enhance their traditional programs. Equipment manufacturers inquired about her specifications and modifications, understanding that her attention to detail reflected standards that serious competitors demanded. Most significantly, other individual competitors approached her for advice about training techniques and competition preparation, recognizing her as a role model for shooters who lacked institutional support but possessed the dedication required for elite performance. Emma's telephone conversation with her grandfather that evening was filled with the quiet satisfaction that comes from achieving goals through honest effort and systematic preparation. Carlos listened as Emma described her competition experience, her performance under pressure, and the recognition she had received from the shooting community. His response combined pride in her achievement with appreciation for the journey that had brought her to this moment of triumph. The lessons he had taught her during those early morning sessions in the New Mexico desert had provided the foundation for success at the highest levels of collegiate competition. Professor Williams called Emma the following morning to congratulate her on her championship and to discuss how her shooting success related to her academic and professional development. The professor noted that Emma's systematic approach to shooting excellence demonstrated the same analytical capabilities that would serve her well in graduate school and engineering practice. The conversation concluded with Professor Williams suggesting that Emma's experience could provide valuable material for research into the application of engineering principles to athletic performance optimization. Coach Thompson's call came as a surprise to Emma, though his tone suggested genuine respect for her achievement, rather than the condescending politeness that had characterized their previous interactions. He expressed interest in learning about her training methods and suggested that the university team could benefit from incorporating some of her analytical approaches into their preparation. Emma's response was gracious but non-committal, recognizing that her journey had moved beyond the need for institutional validation or approval from those who had previously dismissed her capabilities. The media attention that followed Emma's championship victory focused on the story of an individual competitor who had succeeded against established programs with significant resource advantages. Interviews with shooting sports publications provided Emma with opportunities to explain her systematic approach to training and competition preparation, sharing insights that could benefit other shooters who lacked access to traditional coaching resources. Her story became an inspiration for individual competitors who believed that excellence could be achieved through personal effort guided by sound principles. Emma's return to classes at Northern State University was marked by recognition from faculty and students who had followed her shooting success through local media coverage. Her achievement demonstrated that academic excellence and athletic success could be pursued simultaneously when both were approached with systematic dedication and proper time management. The engineering program took pride in her success, recognizing that her analytical capabilities had contributed directly to her competitive achievement. The scholarship offers that began arriving within weeks of Emma's championship victory represented opportunities she had never previously considered accessible. Major university programs offered full support for her continued education and shooting development, recognizing that her systematic approach could benefit their existing programs while providing her with resources for continued excellence. Private sponsors expressed interest in supporting her equipment and travel expenses in exchange for product endorsements and technical feedback. Emma's decision about her future required careful consideration of how her various interests and goals could be integrated into a coherent plan for continued development. Her engineering education remained important for long-term career prospects, while her shooting success had opened doors to opportunities that could support her academic pursuits while allowing continued competitive participation. The systematic approach that had guided her shooting development would be equally valuable for evaluating these complex decisions. The conversation with Frank Morrison about her future plans reflected the mentoring relationship that had contributed significantly to Emma's competitive development. Frank emphasized that her shooting success had demonstrated principles that would serve her well in any technical field: the value of systematic preparation, the importance of questioning established methods when data suggested improvements, and the confidence that comes from achieving excellence through individual effort. His advice was to pursue opportunities that would allow continued development in both engineering and shooting, recognizing that skills developed in one area often enhanced performance in the other. Emma's final decision reflected the same analytical approach that had guided her shooting development. She chose to accept a graduate school offer that would provide research opportunities in precision manufacturing while maintaining eligibility for continued competitive shooting. The program offered access to advanced materials testing equipment that could enhance her ammunition development, while the academic schedule would accommodate the training requirements for international-level competition. The engineering student, who had been dismissed from her college shooting team for questioning traditional methods, had demonstrated that systematic preparation and individual determination could overcome institutional obstacles and achieve excellence at the highest competitive levels. Her story became a testament to the power of analytical thinking applied to athletic performance, showing that success could be achieved through multiple pathways when effort was guided by sound principles and sustained by authentic motivation. Emma Rodriguez's championship victory represented more than individual achievement. It symbolized the triumph of systematic thinking over conventional wisdom, of evidence-based improvement over traditional authority, and of individual determination over institutional conformity. Her journey from dismissed team member to national champion demonstrated that excellence belongs to those who combine natural ability with systematic effort, who question established methods when data suggests better approaches, and who persist in pursuing their goals despite opposition from those who mistake tradition for truth. The gold medal that now occupied a place of honor in Emma's apartment served as a reminder that success is measured not by the approval of others, but by the achievement of personal excellence through honest effort and systematic preparation. Her story would inspire other individual competitors who lacked institutional support but possessed the dedication required for elite performance, proving that the quiet pursuit of excellence often speaks louder than the loudest claims of authority or tradition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.